Welcome to the Pennsylvania High School Football Report podcast. I'm Brian Linder, here with Dan Sostek. No Eric Epler this week. He's actually working on a story that, we're recording this on a Wednesday, Dan, and there's going to be some interesting news basketball-wise on PennLive.com Wednesday evening. By the time this podcast comes out, folks will see it. And if you didn't see it, check back on PennLive.com. Pretty significant as far as the basketball landscape and some coaching moves there. Dan, just you and I, you sent me a few talking points, but it's going to be one of those podcasts where we don't necessarily have a big script this week. I was texting back and forth with Lance Dean. He's out in Texas. He told me we may get him on a future podcast here, maybe before the draft. That guy, for people who don't know, Dan, former CD East head coach, now the Susquehanna Township AD. If he's out in Texas, there's a good chance he's probably working with Micah Parsons, Dallas Cowboys fame, Harrisburg High star. He has worked with Abdul Carter a good bit. And so a lot of interesting things we could talk about with Lance Dean before the NFL draft.
We also are probably a couple other guys slated to hop on at some point during this offseason. I think Harrisburg's Elias Koch, a lot to talk about with him. He's had a busy offseason, and a lot of those guys are in the 7-on-7. I think we're trying to get on because they'd have some good insight into, they were playing on a borderline all-star team back there in California, right?
Well, I think they've actually been playing with Torrey Smith's guys right out of Baltimore, I think, right? Torrey's in Baltimore now.
That team is loaded. And then there are a bunch of guys that could be playing against each other in the state playoffs next year. So
we had Torrey Smith on this podcast a couple years ago. I think it's before he actually had that 7-on-7 team. But yeah, they got Gavin Sidwar playing quarterback, Messiah Mickens from Harrisburg. Of course, Gavin Sidwar is the great quarterback out at LaSalle College. Joey O'Brien, their wide receiver at LaSalle College, is on that team, and Elias Koch, obviously from Harrisburg, on that team as well. A lot of talent. I've seen a lot of clips on them on YouTube. It's been fun to watch. Not YouTube, but on so trying to keep up with that and keep an eye on those guys as well. So I bring up Lance. I want to bounce back to him real quick, Dan. Working with Micah Parsons and our guy Micah again. Micah gets a lot of flack from people because he's on Twitter. He's really has a media presence. I've always said that I felt like when Micah's playing days are done, he'll be like Michael Strahan. I think he'll be like on Good Morning America or something. And, you could say whatever you want to say, but I think he's continually gotten better on the mic with this show on Future Report. He's there kind of like they give him a role as like the head of football content over there, which is kind of neat for him. I'd be fascinated to talk with him about how he's approached that. He gets a lot of flack because he kind of speaks his mind and he says what he says. And I know he's trying to show that he can really be a leader for the Cowboys, angling for what has kind of been rumored or discussed to maybe be the biggest defensive contract ever in the history of football, Dan. You reported for voluntary workouts the other day. Calvin Hill, the respected beat writer for the Cowboys, tweeted that Jerry, pay that man. But there's a lot of discussions of whether they are actually going to pay Micah. There's even rumors, Dan, I've seen that he could be traded during the draft. I don't know. What are you seeing about Micah Parsons? How are you feeling about the guy?
It's interesting. Point of conversation right now with Micah is barely even about him. And it's, the contract stuff is interesting, all the debate about his personality, but to me, it's, when you have a guy who wore your number at your university coming out and Abdul Carter, and he's getting even more hype than Micah did out of college, the comparisons are going to start flowing, right? That's been a popular thing, people talking about like, hey, is Abdul Carter as good as Micah Parsons? Is he going to be the next Micah Parsons? Is he going to be better than Micah Parsons? That's sort of been like the Micah offseason talking point that's interested me more than all this drama, because I just think Jerry Jones likes the drama and likes dragging this stuff out to keep his name in headlines, and he pays guys eventually. Like, I think Micah likes being a Cowboy, and I think the Cowboys are going to want to stay in the Micah Parsons business. But that's, to me, the more interesting debate, and I haven't really talked to you about this, is how you compare Abdul Carter to Micah, because I think there are definitely some similarities, right? That they played all over the field at Penn State. Abdul Carter's basically had 1 year as a pure pass rusher. He's more of a linebacker to start. I think Abdul Carter's a great athlete. I don't know if he's quite the athlete Micah is, but some of the production stuff leans a little Abdul Carter's way. Some of, you know, I think that Abdul Carter might be more of somehow might be a more traditional kind of, pass rusher than Micah. But I think to me, it's a really fascinating discussion because it's a layup right down the middle to have that comparison point. And obviously two PA guys, same school. It's interesting to see the national people kind of talk about that.
Yeah. So I have a new laptop, so I can't completely sign into it at the moment. But if you look, I did a story with Lance Dean last year after he worked out Abdul Carter. And I actually asked him that question because, obviously he trains Micah Parsons as well. And he said there's some similarities, there's some differences. And I'd be interested if we can get it back on the podcast to kind of talk with him a little bit about that and kind of get the update, because I think Abdul has made I think he's made progression since we even talked last year. What I'll say is, I didn't see Abdul in person like I did Micah. Now, Abdul's a guy who, I've said it on this podcast, you can go back and look, and I don't care what all the other recruiting gurus and stuff might say and sites. We actually had him rated higher, and when we were doing our rankings, than anybody. Like I said, I called Greg Pickle and said, go look at this kid. And this is when people didn't have him nearly as high as we did. I had him up at the top of the state. I've always really liked him. He was playing linebacker back then. If you look at their bodies, he's a bigger, more kind of huskier guy, in my opinion. He's still quick twitch. He's more of like a thicker looking guy to me. Micah, I've covered a lot of athletes, that have played in the NFL. In high school, I would have compared Micah more to Daquan Bowers, who was the number one prospect in the nation. Ended up being a second round.
I was such a big Daquan Bowers believer in that draft. I'm so disappointed.
So I was the only media member invited to Daquan's draft party. True story. So, we're getting a little sidetracked, but I'll tell the story. Daquan and I had a really great relationship, similar to like what I had with Micah when he was in high school. It started when I got to Orangeburg Times-Democrat. Daquan was the star defensive end out at Bamberg Earhart High School, so one stop like town. Go out there, go to a couple practices. And I said, hey, man, I want to do a big story on you. What do you do for fun? He said, well, look, we go to Raiders Alley on the Thursday before games. Me, Chris Presley. Chris played at Coastal Carolina. This is a little 1A school in South Carolina, very small school. Brandon Bamberg, who ended up signing with Holy Cross. His brother actually is Justin Bamberg, who people might know, who is a politician in South Carolina and also has taken up some sort of famous like civil rights cases as a lawyer. But anyway, he said we go out to this place called Raiders Alley. It's a little hole in the wall bar with my dad, Dennis Pop Bowers, who died. And he said we eat chicken wings, and have a good time on Thursday nights before the game. So I said, can I drop in? I went out and I sat in with him and I did that story. And we always had a great relationship. So going to the NFL draft, Daquan had a pretty bad pro day. He was a monster. One in the Gursky at Clemson this junior year was unbelievable. He was a freak athlete in the Micah Parsons mold. Now, I don't think that Daquan had the same desire that Micah did, the same drive. And Daquan's a very good coach now, and I'm not saying that to be negative. Micah has a next level type of drive that makes him special. But going back to Daquan real quick, and I went off on a real side story of my life here, Dan. But going into the draft, he had a poor pro day at Clemson, and the issue was he had a knee injury, and it was a degenerative injury. And so he went from being projected to be the number one pick in the draft to falling all the way to the second round. And they knew he was going to fall. So as I was preparing to go to his draft party that I was invited to, his agent reached out to me and said, look, no media is allowed. We turned down, no media is allowed. You can't come. And I said, well, call Daquan, tell him Brian Linder wants to come, and you told Brian Linder he can't come. Make sure he knows it's me. And his agent called me right back. And this is a testament to Daquan. He said, look, I don't know what you got going on with Daquan. He said, but we turned out NFL Network. We turned out ESPN. You're the only media member allowed to come. And so I went. actually was mentioned by the top Clemson website as the only media member allowed at the party. It was a bit of a depressing deal because he was legitimately projected to be the number one pick and fell to the second round. Wasn't as bad as a couple years before when I was at Ricky Sapp. Ricky Sapp was drafted by the Eagles, another great defensive end out of Bamberg Earhart High School, who went to Clemson. He was projected to be a first round pick, fell all the way to the fifth round. I was at his house for 3 days, Dan. I'm going to tell you guys, when you go to a draft party for a guy, the first day there's like 1,000 people in his backyard. And then the second day there's 200. And then the third day it's you, his agent, and his mom. That's pretty rough. But you know what? Ricky and I still have a great relationship. He told me to come back that day. And to this day, we're friends on Facebook, and occasionally we exchange some messages and stuff. Might even have him on this podcast one day. He was working Clemson strength and conditioning, Dan, and now he is a motivational speaker as well. I think he'd be a good guy to have on here. He had a pretty decent NFL career. So went down a long rabbit hole there to tell you that, you know, that was a interesting. We're going to talk about the draft some, but I've had a lot of interesting draft experiences. And I think I got a little sidetracked there with you, but Daquan was a guy.
Yeah. I think kind of going back to the original point though, like that it's, you kind of wonder, like, would Abdul Carter be getting this hype without kind of that Micah archetype to look at, right? Like if Micah hadn't kind of done pretty much the exact same thing Abdul did, you know, switch to basically pure pass rushing and thrive in it and just kind of have 1 year of tape. And I think what Abdul's difference and why he's kind of getting this top 3 hype is because, frankly, he played in bigger games than Micah ever got to at Penn State, right? That he played through that injury, dominated in the college football playoff games. So you wonder if the kind of the fact that he showed up in big moments kind of helped him in a way where Micah had a great Penn State career, but it just kind of, it ended.
Well,
and then there was about the COVID year too, right?
Michael was unique in that he didn't play that year.
Yeah.
So he was coming off a year where he didn't play because of COVID. He opted out. Nobody knew what's happening. If you go look back, there were, and he talked about it with us. So I don't, I don't have an issue bringing it up, and it's fair to bring it up. There were questions about his character. Now, again, I tell you, I feel like I know that person. I feel like a lot of them were unwarranted. There were some concerning accusations made in a lawsuit by a former Penn State player. I think the parts involving Michael were tossed out.
That's the funny thing is that that's the funny thing is that Abdul Carter's starting to kind of, and you wonder if some of this might be teams wanting him to fall to 4 or 5 or whatever. But there's been some buzz in the last week that there've been some character concern. Yeah, it's been something that's been popping up a little. And, at draft time, that's all what 95% of the time when you hear kind of, oh, this guy might have some red flags that people didn't like in interviews, it's because they're trying to get the guy to fall to them and they're trying to scare people off. But it is kind of funny how similar a lot of the pluses and negatives are ahead of the draft for both of these guys.
They're somewhat similar. I do think they have a little bit different body build. Micah is more built like a Ferrari. I mean, he's one of the most explosive athletes on the planet. I really mean, I don't think I'm exaggerating. Because when you see Micah in person, I remember when he came before the draft, he was in the PennLive offices and he said, I'm 250 right now. And, he looks like when he's 250, Micah looks like he's 225. He's very lean, very explosive. Abdul, to me, looks a little bit more like a defensive lineman than Micah probably actually does walking around in street clothes. I think Micah's a little bit more explosive, but Abdul's that quick twitch guy too. There are a lot of similarities. Like I said, it'd be fascinating to get Lance back on here and see, a year down the road, how he compares them again. I'm very excited to see where Abdul, like I said, he was a guy who I feel like we were kind of hyping up before a lot of people. And, it's always fun when you feel like you're first. Look, we've been last on guys too. There've been guys where we haven't necessarily seen it and that guy blew up. And so I'm not like just saying we're always right or whatever, but it is fun to kind of see the evolution of a guy who you kind of always believed in and to see where he goes. That'll be fun, but he's not the only guy, right? I mean, for Pennsylvania ties, Like you said, Cam Ward looks like a lock to probably the quarterback from Miami to go number 1 overall, probably to the Titans. And Abdul Carter.
Who's really been blowing up is my guy from Pitt, Donovan McMillan's visited the Eagles today as top 30 visited the Steelers as well. He had a really good pro day. So what people say about these top 30 visits is it doesn't necessarily mean it's not always positive. A lot of times it's, hey, you had a really good pro day. We want to see if that number is legit or not. But it does mean teams are interested. So we start seeing a lot of kind of those fringe guys start getting a chance to get in front of these teams at their facilities.
Yeah. Donovan McMillan's a guy who I actually got a chance. I interviewed him quite a few times on the phone when he was at Peters Township. Was doing a lot more stuff around the state. Good family, good young man when I talked to him on the phone. Again, it'll be interesting to see where he lands. I think another fascinating guy to keep an eye on just to see where he goes and what happens with him. I don't think he's going to get drafted. Julian Fleming, obviously, Southern Columbia, went to Ohio State, and then went to Penn State. He didn't run well at all, according to all reports, like a 4.7, 240, Dan.
Yeah.
I think we've discussed it on the podcast before. I've seen people, compared to Julian was the number 1 wide receiver in the nation coming out of high school. And I've seen people try to knock the young man and say, well, maybe he was overrated and stuff like that. I really do not believe he was overrated coming out of high school. He performed really well at national level. I know he went to the Under Armour game. I think he was on Deion Sanders' team at the time. Deion Sanders said the guy was going to play in the NFL. I do believe when he was on his team. I think he probably got banged up some along the way, Dan. I think he got a little bigger. Football happens sometimes with guys. Football's a tough sport to project sometimes. You look at a guy, they look like a lock, and then you know what? They get a knee injury or ankle injury or, just get banged up. It's a wear and tear game. Julian Fleming, when you look at it, the kid went to school, he got a degree, he played for some really good teams. He got on the field. Was it what everybody expected? No. If he wants it, I would love to see him get a shot. I think it's going to be kind of difficult for him there. I don't know if you see anything else about him, Dan, but he's been one of the more fascinating topics of the discussion, considering where he was ranked coming out of high school in Pennsylvania.
It feels like those are the type of guys that we're going to be monitoring a lot during the draft, right? It's guys that, were big stars in high school and then kind of had to find their way, find their role. A lot of these guys have been in college for a while because of the COVID years too. So that might work against them too, that they've got 5 years of football on them, on their body instead of 4 or 3. There's tons of interesting kind of stuff along those lines as well. Then obviously, we've got some guys at local guys. Well, I know Dante Kent's been working out, trying to get it. I'm not sure if he'll get drafted, but at the very least get a camp deal. Like the draft is much more than that first round. And we do have obviously some first round guys, and we have guys like Kyle McCord who knows, could end up with the Steelers, could end up as a backup with the Eagles or something. Like we have big name guys, but it's just as fascinating to watch these kids who have kind of had to find their way, especially with that transfer portal door kind of being the first class of kids that really have had that transfer portal available to them most of their careers.
I want to bounce back real quick. I got this story up I did with Lance Dean talking about it too. And I know I'm a little all over the place here, so bear with me, but him comparing Micah Parsons and Abdul Carter, just in case we don't have him before the draft. He said, Lance trained both of them, Lance Dean. He says, just look at their frames and their athletic intangibles. I think they are 2 different types of players in some ways too, but their athleticism at their size, that right there puts them in a category alone. He, talking about Carter, can play defensive end, but he could play linebacker high level too. I don't think he's going to play linebacker now. This was a year ago, and he's obviously added some more weight. But anyway, he says he's like Micah in that way as well. And there are not a lot of guys you could say that about. Just his ability to move, he's pretty quick. He's very athletic. It's not like his movements are forced. He's a natural athlete. I'm just impressed overall with his ability to bend and his flexibility. He's a big person who can play smaller with the ability to change direction well, and he plays with violent hands. So that's a guy that trained Micah Parsons, kind of talking about some things that they have in common. And I think all of those things are probably things you'd like to hear about a pass rushing defensive end, Dan.
And the other thing we forgot to mention about Abdul Carter too is that the other kind of red flag with him is that he has some foot issue that, they say that his agent, I believe Drew Rosenhaus's agent, says it's fine, but you never really know what if an agent is saying, my client is healthy, doesn't necessarily mean everything. If Abdul Carter were to fall, that would probably be, I imagine, why it would have happened is because some teams got to look at his feet, his x-rays, and we're like, we don't like this. But everything on the field is pretty much what Lance said, right? That he's just like this super moldable pass rusher that's just going to do everything. And I think he proved in the college football playoff that he's also tough as nails too. I imagine that injury that he played through was something that would have kept a lot of other guys out.
What pick do the Cowboys have?
I think they're picking like 11th or whatever. He's not going to fall there. There's no chance.
I think Micah tweeted at one point something like, don't let that happen.
I don't think he has to worry about that. I think if Abdul Carter fell, teams would be trading, they'd be salving trade up because this also isn't a very good edge rusher draft. So, heck, I know he just visited Foxborough, so that'd be fun for me as a Patriots fan.
Look, if Micah Parsons gets traded, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world because I kind of feel like the Cowboys might be a mess. So anyway.
Don't worry, dude. They've got Joe Milton now. They're all good.
You're going to be so mad when he's better than Drake May.
I am willing to go on the record on this podcast right now that Joe Milton will never be.
Wow. Lock it in.
He's not going to get as crazy. I'll talk about it more off the podcast, but I feel very confident about that.
Dude, in 4 years, Drake May is going to be backing up Mason Rudolph for the Steelers.
In 4 years, Joe Milton will be 30 years old.
Anyway, all right, so back on track, Dan. You mentioned my guy, Dante Kent. Love that guy. Fantastic young man, fantastic family. His brother, Ronald, Harrisburg High alums, both of them. His brother, Ronald, is playing in the Canadian Football League. A little bit undersized. He's a burner, though, runs a 4.3. Talking about Ronald, had a really good year in the Canadian Football League. Dante's about 5'10". I watched him play a little bit at Central Michigan the past couple of years. Had a really nice career there outside of being a pretty darn good corner. He runs like a 4.38-ish or something like that, and he's a pretty good punt returner. I tried to find anything about him. I'm seeing undrafted free agent next to his name a lot. I think he's going to at least get a shot. I don't know what else you've seen about him there. Another guy I wanted to mention too is Fatorma Mulba, who's a fantastic story. Ended up signing with Penn State, but then transferred to West Virginia. Had a pretty strong senior season for West Virginia defensive tackle. I know he's working out and hoping for a shot too.
Yep. We've also got a couple tight ends that might get drafted, and CJ Dupree from Alabama. Later third day pick potentially would be Gavin Bartholomew from Pitt, Blue Mountain kid.
Gavin Bartholomew was your guy, man. So, third day pick, I think he's a good player.
Yeah, the only issue is, he's 6'5", 250. I've always felt that Pitt has never really kind of utilized him the way they should have, and that he was a little better than his film is, but his film's his film. So I would not be surprised if he ends up being a pretty good player. He could be a guy that kind of fits more into that like H-back, like kind of move around kind of guy, because he's pretty athletic, sort of a tweener, but he'd be another guy too. Like the Steelers love scooping up those Pitt guys, so I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up in Pittsburgh on the practice squad or something. There's a lot of these fringe guys from my alma mater in this draft. Brandon George has really played his way into the conversation with a good training camp too from Berks, or pro day from Berks Catholic. I feel like day 3 is going to be the day where we see a lot of our keystoners getting drafted.
Brandon George's dad used to message me a lot to tell me he was the number 1 linebacker in the state.
Might not have been that, but he might get drafted. So
I don't think he was always a fan of where we had him ranked or whatever. But look, it was all love. I'm glad to see Brandon hopefully getting his shot here, and I don't really have a problem with people advocating for
their kids, especially
coaches or whatever, saying, "Hey, look out for me." I would rather that than you just not care about them.
Yeah, I feel like this draft is just a fascinating one, even beyond the PA guys. But yeah, and we kind of briefly mentioned it, but don't always have a 2 PA quarterback in the draft. I feel like, the last time you had 2 PA quarterbacks might have been like the 80s when you had Jim Kelly and Dan Marino going. But Kyle McCord and Will Howard, who John Gruden compared Will Howard to Josh Allen, which was quite a quite a comparison. I'm not sure if he ever watched. I don't even think Will was feeling that comparison entirely, but yeah, a lot of PA guys.
The ship has sailed for me on John Gruden. I kind of feel like he's just kind of like a caricature of what he used to be and sort of just trying to cling to relevancy. Now, not knocking Will. I saw Will play in high school, and
yeah, but the Josh Allen comparison just doesn't make sense.
No, I don't know. John Gruden falls in love with every quarterback he runs into, too. And again, look, I think Will's really intriguing to me. I don't think, from what I read, I don't think he had a good combine, but
that stuff doesn't matter when you're a pocket passer. Like, would you be shocked if Will Howard has the career Brian Hoyer had in his NFL career? Like, no, I would not be shocked at all. That's a pretty darn good NFL career to have. I know Brian Hoyer is kind of shorthand for really, kind of to tease players and everything, but that's a guy who played in the NFL for what, like 15 years?
I think Howard and McCourt are like interesting guys to me. Like they could go be backups. They might end up being starters.
I kind of think Mac Jones hurt those guys. I think if Mac Jones had worked out a little better, they might have earned a little more benefit of the doubt.
Well, they're better than Mac Jones.
You don't have to sell me on that.
He's terrible. But anyway, what else we got to talk about? You sent me some notes. Come on, we got more stuff.
Some local kids recruitments are starting. This is kind of the time of year where you start seeing some kids, right, that, tweet out they're visiting camps and everything and doing stuff like that. And all of a sudden they get one offer and then they start getting another and then another. We're tagged in all of them. And please keep tagging us because it's the best way to make sure we see it. Liam Fuller, we've always kind of, flagged down a little bit on Bishop McDevitt, right? Because you just don't find too many kids in tight. First off, you don't find too many tight ends in general in high school. I feel like a lot of times that if you're playing tight end, it's more just a positional designation and you're probably going to end up playing, wide receiver, defensive end. But he is a legit 6'6", like 230 at least. He is started just, I feel like every day you get a new offer. I believe he's Matty Johnson, new offense coordinator at San Diego State's first offer from Bishop McDevitt since moving over there. So his recruitments have blown up. And then another guy that I don't know how much we've talked about on the podcast, but I know Epp and I are really big fans of his game. Is Mechanicsburg defensive end Colin Stair picking up an Eastern Michigan offer. He's been picking up a handful of stuff. I think he got Stony Brook the other day too. He's a really good player. Huge part of why Mechanicsburg, had the turnaround they did. His running mate Drake Dawson starting to get some interest as well. So yeah, it's a fun time of year where you start seeing those kids that have been working to kind of get that recognition start to get it.
Yep, and it's an interesting. It continues to be sort of an interesting landscape for recruiting too. Like I know we were just talking before we came on the air, and one of the top players in the state of Pennsylvania the last couple of years was Tamir Robinson, who you said the Penn State linebacker now just entered the portal.
Yeah,
some rumors he's going to go to Pitt, which he's from right there in Pittsburgh.
I think Penn State people were kind of surprised because I don't think this was necessarily a case of he wasn't going to get playing time. It seemed like that the Penn State staff was pretty high on him, that he was going to be a guy that was potentially going to take a leap. But this is the new thing in college football, right? If right around these spring games you don't get playing time or you feel like you're not on the depth chart the way you want to be, you're just going to bolt. Pitt has had a handful of guys enter the portal. I think 23 West Virginia kids entered the portal as well this morning. So it's the nature of the beast now. I don't know if you saw during the spring game, Justin Cook rushed for a touchdown for Pitt.
Yeah, the Harrisburg, we've had him on here, the Harrisburg kid who spent the first couple years of his career at East Stroudsburg. Full disclosure, his grandma, Donna Maldonado, used to work at PennLive. She was secretary in our office and did a lot of things for it. She was great. Yeah. Hope she's doing well, but it's good. He's a good young man. He's really smart and really explosive.
A rushing touchdown is interesting, like because they had been talking, right, that they might be using him at running back, which I don't think he played ever at Harrisburg or at East Stroudsburg, right? Or
correct. No, he didn't. East Stroudsburg, he was a wide receiver and a kick returner and punt returner, and Harrisburg, he played corner and wide receiver. He actually had like I want to say 13 picks his senior year at corner. So he's always been a versatile kid, but he never really played running back.
Well, Pitt kind of uses their running backs as receivers, so it kind of makes sense that they wanted a guy with good hands and maybe, they could find kind of a diamond in the rough there. But it's good for him because, like you said, he's always been an awesome kid to deal with. Was one of those culture setters at Harrisburg, right? So, him and that's Sean Lee Jr. got to see the field in the spring game as well. So, I was thinking this might be kind of the most central PA Pitt has been in a while, and they're kind of like approaching how many kids from Central PA Penn State might see take the field because Kenny Johnson from Dallastown was named the most improved player over Pitt's entire spring practices. So they've got Kenny Johnson, Jules Goff, Sean Lee Jr., and Justin Cook. A lot of Central PA flavor that a lot more than Pitt has typically had the last few years.
Good deal. Well, look, what else we got, Dan?
I believe Ep is going to write about it, but Matt Heiser is back at Gettysburg. I think he's been working the last couple of days, but good to hear. I think obviously it wasn't quite as high profile as the Joe Heaton situation, but there really wasn't. It didn't seem like there was any justification for kind of getting rid of Heiser. It seemed like he does a lot of good work in that program, and it felt kind of like a weird issue. Ep would be able to speak more on it because he did more of the reporting, but felt like there were some hangups with absorbing Fairfield's football program into theirs. But that's a guy who cares a lot about that program. He's been there for a while. As we've said before, as we said with the Joe Heaton podcast, if the community supports kind of having these guys and they come out and speak and say, hey, this coach means a lot to this community and does good work in the community, that's more than enough for me to say, I think you should probably keep them because that's at the end of the day, that's what a high school football coach's job is. So glad to hear there was resolution there.
All right, then looking forward to the weekend, Dan. Obviously, big weekend. WrestleMania is coming up. Are you disappointed in what they've done with the Bloodline storyline? And how do you feel about the lack of or total involvement of the final boss, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, and all of this coming up this weekend?
You know what I've always said, and that's The Rock is, he's no match for John Cena because John Cena is a Massachusetts native, and anyone who's born in Massachusetts is superior to the Hawaiians.
John Cena now works for the final boss. He's the heel.
Oh, so he's on his team now, so I shouldn't be.
Yeah. He turned heel on Cody Rhodes, joined forces with The Rock. John Cena's never really been a heel. That's going to be night 2 of WrestleMania. I think it's a little bit of a lackluster WrestleMania, Dan, considering what I felt like we probably could have had, like a Roman Reigns versus The Rock scenario coming up. I don't know what happened there. I think maybe The Rock actually got hurt. But, night 1, you got Roman Reigns and CM Punk and Seth Rollins.
Got his Mark Kerr movie coming out.
Yeah, Roman Reigns is a former college football player, so we could tie this into football. And, Jey Uso, who you saw wrestling Gunther.
I'll probably tune in because it's on Peacock to watch John Cena and Cody Rhodes because that seems kind of interesting.
That's night 2. That'll be Sunday. You get the heel, the bad guy, John Cena, for one of the first times he's the bad guy.
He's going to think.
You would think before because this is you would think before he retires, but there's no opportunity for that here with Cody Rhodes. I mean, Cody Rhodes.
Can't he just do that mid-match? What if he just like gives up? See, I'm spoiling WrestleMania.
That would be dumb, Dan. That would not.
I think it'd be lovely. I'm gonna send
Triple H. That would not be a good play. And then your guy Logan Paul.
Do not call that guy.
Your guy Logan. Listen, people can say what they want to say about Logan Paul, but he is an excellent heel in that he's so easily unlikable.
And I've heard he's pretty good.
He's a pretty good athlete.
Yeah,
you can't knock him. Yeah. He's wrestling AJ Styles, who my wife always says she's jealous of his hair.
You know what? Maybe next week we'll maybe post WrestleMania we'll rank the mid-pen players most likely to become professional wrestlers.
I actually don't watch a ton of wrestling. I sort of pay attention to it because when I was in high school, it was big with the NWO, and that's when The Rock was young and Stone Cold and stuff like that. So I still kind of peripherally kind of pay attention to it. I'll tune in for the big shows and stuff just to see what's going on. Look, a lot of football people, there's a crossover audience there. So big weekend, Dan. You were filling me in and on Passover. Sounds like you had a great Passover.
I always have to remember that people don't know what Passover is. So did have a good one.
You had brisket, and I'm a little jealous of that.
It was a very good brisket. Unfortunately, some of the desserts are a little lackluster because you can't use bread or anything. But my mom's a good enough chef that she just threw some kosher for Passover marshmallows on some kosher for Passover graham crackers and some kosher for Passover chocolate, and it worked out.
Easter's coming up this weekend. You know what my wife and I eat for Easter now. It's kind of like a tradition the last 2 years because they don't
chicken.
No, because I haven't been eating bad, but on Easter I'll eat bad, and we get some really good fried chicken.
That sounds good to me. That sounds way better to me than a ham or anything like a ham or.
We go outside of the box. Now we do the traditional ham and turkey and stuff like that for Thanksgiving, Christmas. We sometimes do the traditional stuff, or sometimes we'll do like seafood, like fried shrimp and stuff like that, which is also.
That sounds good to me. Yeah,
it is. But anyway, look, everybody I hope everybody had a happy Passover like Dan did, and a happy Easter. Watch some wrestling. We got a lot of stuff coming up. Drafts next week. As we told you, there's some PA guys in there. A lot of movement in the recruiting stuff. Ramir Vaughn's been doing a lot of recruiting stuff on our website. Dan and those guys are out in the field covering a lot of spring sports now. Baseball and softball and stuff. Dan's actually flips over from boys basketball to softball during this time of the year, but Epler's out there with baseball. We got a lot of stuff going on PennLive.com. Make sure you check us out there. Dan, tell them how to find you on social media.
Dan_Sostek, Sostek.
Hey, producer Megan, tell them how to find you on social media. Get it on.
Savvy Literate at anywhere you can find.
And Megan's got all kind of stuff going on too. She's got comic books and she does all kind of stuff. She does a million things. And then I'm at Sports by B Linder on X. Check us out on social media. Check us out at PennLive.com. We'll see you next week.